That night, the sky didn't turn dark, it turned a bluish electric purple. The air grew unnervingly still, a silence so profound. It felt like the entire world was holding its breath. Silas ran a hand over his rifle, oiling the bolt, kinking his back down. He wasn't chasing gold. He wasn't chasing glory. He was chasing another few months of a life for the only person in the world who mattered. As he drifted into a light sleep, the weight of that life settled upon him. The dime novels he occasionally traded at the outpost often painted the mountain man as romantic rugged king of the wilderness. The reality Silas knew was far greater. It was a life of solitude, a constant battle with the elements, and a fight to maintain one's immunity in a place that actively sought to strip it away. He thought of his father, a man who had died with nothing but his integrity. A man's strength is not in his grip, but in what he refuses to let go of. His father had once told him, Silas hand tightened around his knife. He refused to let go. He wound right through hell if it meant Dilara remained warm. The dawn did not bring a sun, but a sun suffocating grey mist. Silas mounted his mare, best a steady roan, and rode into the maw of the wilderness. Within 2 hours, the sky broke open, starting as a hesitant flutter of wet flakes and escalating within 30 minutes to a full-blown whiteout. Visibility vanished. The world compressed into a single, immediate point of existence. The space between his horse ears and the next 10 feet of horse and trail. This was the challenge. This was where the test of a brother's love truly began. The cold was no longer a merry sensation. It had taken up resistance in his very bones and entered that gnawed at him. By the second day, the wind howled like a banshee, tearing at Silas' leather coat as if it intended to rip the skin from his body. Bess whined nervously, her breath plumbing into the icy air like a frozen steam. Silas leaned forward, burying his gloved hand in her mane. Easy girl, he murmured, his voice for a foreign whisper as the galley almost there. Devil's Pass was a narrow artery between jagged rock wells. One side dropped into an unfathomable abyss, while the other rose in a wall of glistening, ice-slicked granite. Each step was a carefully negotiated toss with gravity. Silas dismounted, his boots slipping and scraping for purchase on the treacherous ice. He had to lead the horse, his own body serving as a buffer against the relentless blast. His mind, however, flitted back to a precious fragments of his childhood, the scent of his mother's bread, the comforting presence of his father's workshop. The world outside seemed to shrink, every single passing hour dissolving into a blinding expanse of white. Then the ground beneath Bess shifted violently. It wasn't just snow, a torrent of losing shale and icy avalanche down, rumbling under her hooves. Silas laughed for the bridle, his body stiffening as he fought to control the terrified animal. The strap of his back bit into his shoulder, a searing pain he barely registered as he wrestled with the panicked mare. If Bess fell, then both fell. The moment stretched into an eternity, a slow-motion pallet on the edge of oblivion, white with a desperate heave. He dragged her towards the interior wall, his legs skidding perilously close to the precipice. They stood there trembling as the icy cascade thundered past them, vanishing into the black void below. Silas let out a shaky breath, his chest burning. He was utterly alone, miles from anyone, with the storm showing no sign of abating. He checked his list: flour, sugar, salt, dried meat, Ilara cough's medicine. Turning back was not an option. He was the only thing standing between his sister and the icy silence of winter. As the horse dragged on, exhaustion began to play tricks on his mind. Phantoms flickered in the swirling snow, specters of pioneers and prospectors who had met there, and in these unforgiving mountains. He shook his head, forcing his attention back to the narrow, precarious path. Stay alive, keep the foil lit. He found refuge in a shallow overhang beneath a rocky outcrop. His hands numb and stiff, struggled to strike a flame, but eventually a tiny fire flickered to life, pushing back the overwhelming darkness. He huddled by the meager warmth, pulling out a small carved wooden bird he had made for Ilara years ago, holding it in his frozen hand. A warmth bloomed in his chest, something unrelated to the fire. This was the mountain man reality, stripped of the romantic gloss of that pulp fiction. It wasn't about winning or fighting, it was about enduring, realizing then that if he died here, Ilara would be alone. That thought terrified him more than the storm, the cold, or the spice combined. He would reach the trading post, he would get the supplies, he would return. The mountain would not take him. He was a throne. They did not give up. The third morning dawned with a respective crystalline clarity. The storm had paused, leaving the world trapped in a dazzling shroud of frost. Silas' joints were stiff and aching. His spirit crusted with ice, but his gaze was sharp and unwavering. By mid-afternoon, he reached the trading post, a cluster of weathered log buildings huddled against the wind. The storekeeper, a man named Holloway, with a face like a topographical map, stared at him with wide, disbelieving eyes. "You came through the pass?" Holloway asked, his voice raspy. "No one's made it through there in 3 weeks. We thought the whole thing was buried." Silas didn't answer. He simply produced his list. Holloway watched, his eyes tracing Silas' weary form as he packed the supplies, doing this for the girl. Silas nodded a single curt movement. "She needs them." Holloway did not try to dissuade him. He knew a man driven by duty to his blood better than most. He added a jar of honey and a small plug of tobacco to Silas' bag. "On the house," he said softly. For the road, the return journey was a blur of grim determination. Silas pushed as harder than he had on the way out, fueled by the image of Ilara sitting by the fire waiting. They moved with the singular focus of a machine. When he finally crested the last ridge and saw the thin plume of smoke rising from their cabin chimney, a surge of hope, potent and overwhelming, coursed through him. He spurred past into a canter, the biting cold forgotten. He arrived at the cabin just as the sun began to dip behind the peak, casting long golden shadows across the snow. He pressed through the door, gasping for breath, his clothes caked in ice. Ilara looked up from her book by the fire, her eyes wide. She stood, a look of sheer disbelief on her face. Ilara's eyes welled with tears. She rushed toward Silas, but the sheer exhaustion and the bone-deep chill that had seized his limbs caused him to stumble. "Silas," she cried out, catching him up, using her frail strength to steady him. Silas, his fingers stiff and blue from the biting cold, unslung his heavy bag and set it gently on his floor. His voice was pale and withered, but his eyes had the same unwavering resolve that had sustained him through the frozen wilderness. I made it, Ilara." Silas rasped, his voice a hoarse whisper with the trembling hands. He reached into his bag, pulling out the medicine and the small hand-carved wooden bird he had carried through the storm, medicine and a bit of Ilara quickly retrieved the medicine, her hands shaking as she tended to her brother. She knew the agony he must have endured to cross the pass. In such conditions, within minutes, she had stirred the embers in the hearth into a roaring fire, and warmth began to bleed back into a freaked womb. Silas sank to the floor, closing his eyes in sheer relief as the thaw began to sting his frozen skin. Ilara wrapped a thick wool blanket around his shoulders and sat beside him, rubbing his cold hands between her own. "You shouldn't have gone," Ilara whispered, a sob catching in her throat. "You could have lost her life." Silas opened his eyes slowly, offering a tired but triumphant smile, the smile of a man who had stared into the void and refused a blink to blink. "The Thorns do not give up, Elara, not when it comes to family. For you, I would walk through hell itself." That night, the blizzard raged outside with a renewed fury, but inside the cabin was a sanctuary of peace. The fire crackled rhythmically, and the howling wind outside faded into a distant, muffled murmurs. As Silas watched his sister and to the fire, he realized his journey was complete. The mountain had tried to break him, but he had endured not just through strength, but through the singular, unbreakable tether of love. He was no longer just a mountain man surviving the fire. He was a brother who had defied the impossible to keep his promise. Our history is shaped by the people before us, but the true legends are born in those unobserved moments of selfless sacrifice. If you were moved by the story, please consider smashing that like button, which helps to keep our historical stories in print and fuels the research we put into our frontier stories. Subscribe to the Glided Spur and tap that notification bell so you will never miss our next trip back into the old phase. And I would like to hear from you. What's the biggest obstacle your family have ever faced and overcome? I read every single comment. Thank you for listening.